Hello, and welcome to the training today, ATR 101, Part 1, Understanding African Traditional Religions and Spirituality in Clinical Practice. And the purpose of the training today is to provide basic information, namely for mental health clinicians, but also for anyone that wants to learn as well. The reason I'm providing this training, namely for mental health clinicians, is to help those clinicians who would like to begin to understand more about African traditional religions and spirituality and take on more clients who actually practice these systems. So, again, this is a very, very basic training, not getting too deep. It is also a series. So, this is just part one of the series. Okay. And as we go along, if you have any questions, any feedback, you can definitely put that in the comments or reach out to me at the email that's listed on this slide here. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. Just want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Denise Thomas. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have been working as a licensed clinical social worker for over 20 years now. And a lot of my experience has actually been in trauma. I've dealt with a lot of clients with a lot of different presenting problems, but trauma has been expertise of mine. I've worked with military, dealing with trauma, in foster care. I've done a lot of work in foster care with people who have survived trauma, dealing with trauma, managing trauma, and within my private practice as well. I've also done trainings where I would travel the United States and do training about neuroscience and trauma. And so this is like a little shift here into cultural competency, but you'll see that it'll also go into clinical practice and can be applied with trauma as well as we go throughout the series and continue with these trainings. Okay, so again, my name is Denise, and we'll go ahead and get started on the training today. Okay, so today's focus of this part one of this series is just finding out or talking about what is African traditional religions and spirituality at its basic level. And so that'll be our focus today. You'll hear me say ATR, and when I say ATRs, I am referring to African traditional religions and spirituality. So that's the acronym that's used, and that's the acronym that I'll be using as we go through this training. This training is very brief. Again, it's just a small part of a series, and we're just giving very basic information. All right, so here is a very broad definition of ATRs here on the screen. And so, in short, ATRs is a spiritual system that has its roots in the continent of Africa. Okay. And I want to note, and I want to stress, and I will probably stress this several different times, okay, that there are thousands of spiritual systems across Africa. They're very different. They have different gods, different spirits, different ancestors, different customs. There is no single African religion that exists. So I think this is important because the media has shown Africa to be in a certain light. And so we tend to group all Africans together. Even outside of spirituality, there are so many different types of people in Africa, different languages, different customs, different cultures. So remember, there are thousands of, when we're talking spiritually, in their spiritual system, there are thousands of spiritual systems across Africa. There is no one single religion, okay? Just like there's no one single people. There's different cultures and cultures within cultures and cultures within cultures. So please remember that. So ATRs, they are indigenous spiritual systems developed across African cultures over thousands of years. Like I said, there is no single religion, but a family of, I would consider it more of a family of traditions with shared themes, okay? Themes rooted in oral tradition, lived experience, community, and also connection to nature. A lot of traditions that are centered as well on ancestral reverence, spiritual forces, which we'll get into the different spiritual forces, what they're called in a very basic way, and also the sacredness of life in general. Okay, so again, this is a broad definition for such an expansive um, spiritual system or spiritual systems that exist across the continent. All right, so we're going to give a brief history. We're going to start historically, okay, and then we'll go into the colonial impact and then where we are today, okay. So historically, ATRs, they actually predate any written historical records in many African regions. A lot of knowledge was preserved through storytelling, rituals, different songs and symbols, as well as ceremonies and initiation practices. So there initially wasn't any written historical records. Things were passed down, information was passed down orally. And then along came, the colonial impact. So we had European colonization in addition to missionary systems that came into Africa. And so what happened was we had ATRs begin to be labeled as primitive, pagan, witchcraft, demonized, and so criminalized. They were criminalized as well. Indigenous practices were criminalized. And so in replacement of ATRs, there was this promotion, I'm sorry, not we, but there was this promotion of, to replace it with Abrahamic more religions, for example, Christianity. And so this was the impact that was placed on ATRs. And despite this, many of the practices still survived, adapted, merged, in which we'll talk about how they kind of merged with other forms of religions. And even like, for example, I've been to Ghana before. It was very interesting when I was in Ghana. I mean, on their businesses, on their transportation services, on billboards, they would promote their churches, but they would have like this white Jesus as a picture on there. And so much so, it was like, oh my goodness, so much so that I actually asked the Uber driver, I'm like, why do you guys have so many white Jesus? And it's, you see all these black people and then this white Jesus all over the place. And so he was just like, we really don't think about color or consider color, or color's not important. So again, you can see even in their minds that colonization that happened, and that's still there even in Africa. I see it when I go there. And so yeah, the ATRs, they were considered more demonic, witchcraft, not to be practiced, but they were able to survive in different ways. And when I say they were synchronized, they began to survive and thrive. A lot of the Africans, as they were going through the transatlantic slave trade, they begin to synchronize with, for example, the Catholic religion. So some of the spirits associate with some of the Catholic saints. And so in order to pretend as if they were practicing Catholicism or Christianity, they would have a saint in front of them. But in their minds, they were actually honoring, connecting to the energy of their actual spirit that might be closely related to that particular Catholic saint. Okay, so looking at present day, ATRs are still active, practiced across Africa and the diaspora. More so, the diaspora, they're becoming, I think people were practicing them before, and unintentionally, I've realized even in the Black church, they're doing a lot of the practices of ATRs without their knowledge. Okay, they don't know this is just something that's been passed down to them. Even the idea of being possessed with spirit, okay, that is rooted in the ATRs. In Christianity, they call it the Holy Spirit, okay, but they get mounted by spirits and, possessed by spirits as well in ATRs. So But even outside of that, you do also have some people, now that I'm thinking about it, that practice Christianity and actively practice ATRs at the same time. And then you have those that, kind of been hiding out and don't want others to know because of this stigma that's associated with ATRs due to colonization, due to the slave trade, different things like that. So, but what I am realizing is that people are becoming more using their voice and not being ashamed and openly practicing these religions and spiritual systems now. And there's a lot of people in diaspora that are trying to get back to their roots, learn more about their ancestors. So yeah, so they continue to here present day, continue to influence like healing systems. There's a lot of holistic herbal healing systems in place, cultural identity, spirituality, community life, and even increasing in academic and clinical recognition of their cultural significance. So even though, historically we had it in place, right? We were practicing, our ancestors were practicing the different ATRs, then it was challenged and, attempted to be destroyed by the colonial impact, by slavery, by colonization, by being deemed as demonic, witchcraft, pagan, all the words that you could think of to be used. And yet it still has survived in different ways throughout the transatlantic slave trade. And it's still thriving and surviving today. And so out of that comes the different types of ATRs. Okay, so we're going to go through a few of these different types, and it's important to know that I'm going to explain briefly, broadly, based on a basic level, each of these or some of these practices and spiritual systems. But a lot of these, I want to say, have come from the dispersion of our people into different areas of the world. And so as they were dispersed into different areas of the world from the transatlantic slave trade, some of the names have changed. Some of the practices have changed, those sorts of things. So let's start with Haitian voodoo. This comes from Haiti. So some people practice Haitian voodoo as a religion and others as spirituality. Okay. And so what in Haitian voodoo, they do honorate and venerate spirits. Their spirits that they honor and venerate are called Lwa, Lwa. Okay. And so it emphasizes Haitian voodoo community protection, ancestral lineage that is very important because where your ancestral lineage comes from determines what type of Lwa you work with. It determines, how you practice Haitian voodoo as well. Okay. Herbal healing, the goal of finding balance in your life. Actually, the name voodoo actually means spirit, and voodoo definitely has been stigmatized in a major way by the media, by colonization, but it's so rich. It is very rich in its history, very much deeply rooted in Haiti. And it's such a very beautiful religion and spirituality if you really study about it. They do ceremonies. I've actually been to a couple initiation ceremonies for Haitian voodoo. I've been to ceremonies where they honor the different Lwas as well. So the ceremonies include, they do drumming, they're dancing, they have songs, they give offerings to the spirits as well. So, and it's a lot of fun. It's actually like a party. When I was there, I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to be doing. And then I realized like, okay, this is just like a get together and a party, and you're honoring the different spirits and energies and your ancestors as well. Okay. And then we also have Ifa. Ifa is rooted in West Africa. This is an ancient Yoruba spiritual system. Okay. Yoruba is the name of the people. And it centers around Olodumare. Okay, hopefully I'm saying that right. and he is the supreme creator. Okay, and it also centers around Orishas. So we talked about in Voodoo the Lwas, Lwas. Here we are talking about Orishas. So Orishas is another name for Lwas. So in Ifa they call them Orishas, and these are deities that represent forces of nature. Okay, so for example, you have, I'll just use Oshun. Okay, she is an Orisha, and she governs the rivers. Okay, and so she's associated with that. Or you might have Shango. He is associated with thunder and lightning. So these energies represents forces of nature. And so Ifa in and of itself focuses on wisdom, destiny. Destiny, another word for destiny in Ifa is Ori, your head, Ori. And the reason you came here, your purpose. Now, it's important to note that your destiny can be changed as well, but we won't get into all that. We're keeping it basic. And then it also focuses on divination, which is Ifa. It's very important. Divination is very important in Ifa to guide your path as you walk towards your destiny and your Ori. Ifa is also guided by sacred teachings and verses, okay, and it's originated in present-day Nigeria. All right, and then we also have Santeria or Lukumi. This is a religion or spirituality that is rooted in Yoruba traditions. So it also honors Orishas. It also includes divination, ceremonies, and initiation. There's a strong influence from Cuba. This is where Santeria comes from. And they actually are one of the ones who, they do this in Haitian voodoo as well, synchronize with the Catholic saints. So they have the Orishas syncing with Catholic saints. So they take the Catholic saints and the characteristics of those saints, and if they relate to one of the Orisha energies, they associate them together. Okay. Then we have hoodoo or root work, and this is a synthesis of African and New World folk practices and traditions. So basically, it's an African American folk spirituality. It is not a religion. Okay. It is developed, it was developed mainly in American South, and it's where they do root work, herbs, they work with candles, prayers, intentions. Again, this is not a religion, okay? And then we have Kemetic spirituality, and this comes from ancient Egypt, a religion from ancient Egypt. It is a way of life. It focuses on the spiritual power of ancient Kemetic elements, and that includes Egyptian gods and goddesses as well. And then Candomblé, okay, Candomblé, that is of Brazil, and Voodoo, that is from West Africa. It's related to voodoo, but it's based in Africa, Benin, Togo, Ghana, Nigeria. They focus on spirits, ancestors, and a supreme being as well. Again, this is just a broad focus on the different types of ATRs. There are a lot more. And again, they are all different within themselves as well. All right. So to get into a few clinical takeaways. And so this portion is about, okay, how do we apply this clinically as clinicians, as mental health therapists? What can I take from this information that I was given today? Little information, something to chew on, basic information. What can I take from it? Number one, I would say to avoid what I call the Pan-African trap and making sure we're honoring specificity. Okay, I say that wrong. And lineage. Okay. As I said earlier, and that's very important, there is no one size fit all in ATRs. Okay. Even within a single tradition like Ifa. A client initiated in Nigeria, Isheshe. Okay, Isheshe is, let me use, for example, if you have Christianity, you have Pentecostal, Baptist, Methodist. Okay, Isheshe is that to Ifa. All right, one of the denominations, so to speak. Okay. So if you're initiated any Shay, for example, it'll be vastly different from different practices or taboos or perspectives than a client practicing Santeria in Cuba or New York. Okay. And not only that, even within Ishe or even within, um, different IFA, there's different people that practice different ways. Okay. And so it's important that we ask our clients, avoid first, foremost, avoid making assumptions based on generalized information we might have read and let the client teach you about their specific lineage. For example, you might say, I know there are many beautiful, distinct branches of African traditional spirituality. If you feel comfortable sharing, which specific lineage or community do you or your family align with, and what does that practice look like for you personally? Okay. All right. And then also overcoming what I call the secrecy barrier. Okay. Destigmatization. Because we talked about that colonial impact. We have centuries of colonial demonization, media distortion. You have Hollywood depicting voodoo in certain ways. And believe it or not, they use these principles, they use these practices in these high places. They just don't let you know, and they really don't want you to know. But they definitely use these. And so there's been a lot of religious persecution. So many clients carry deep intergenerational apprehension about disclosing their spiritual practices to Western clinicians, to Western medical people. So because of how ATRs have been depicted. Okay. So the burden is on us as clinicians to actively signal that, the therapeutic space is safe, it's non-judgmental, it is destigmatized, and if a client feels judged, they may omit crucial spiritual stressors or coping mechanisms that can be used for their healing. So that's important. So something you might say, for example, I want you to know that this is a completely safe space, and these are things that we do naturally when we are working with clients. So many of our clients, we understand find strengths in their ancestral practice, in their earth-based or African traditional religions, so if those are a part of your life, feel free. They're welcome here. I respect them as a valid, pathway to healing. So then we have also leverage spiritual coping mechanism as strengths. This is really important and a great takeaway. So ATRs provide incredibly rich active coping mechanism. A lot of the coping mechanisms that we actually use with some clients, just generally speaking, that might not practice these or practice anything, come from these ATRs. Okay. So, but outside of that, even like meditation or spending time in nature, connecting with nature, those sorts of things. But even outside of that, we have like offerings, spiritual bath, altar building, ancestral veneration. These are all powerful somatic, grounding, and cognitive reframing rituals. So we want to validate these practices as vital for self-care and grounding techniques. If a client is highly anxious, asking if they have a ritual space or ancestor altar where they can find quiet and safety, and encouraging them to utilize it as a clinical grounding resource. Okay, so those are some ways to implement this information we talked about today into your spiritual practices. Into your clinical practice with those that practice ATRs. All right, so in conclusion, my biggest thing that I want to stress is that ATRs is a beautiful collection of cultures, religions, traditions, and ancestral practices that have survived slavery, colonization, and generations of misunderstandings. They're different, they have different roots, different paths, but a shared power. Okay, so remembering is different. Figuring out what it looks like for your clients, okay, is very, very important. Africa is not all the same everywhere, okay? Please understand that. So here I have my contact information, my email, and my social media platforms. So if you're interested in following us, learning more information, if you have any questions, you can comment or reach out to me by any of these methods listed here. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you going through this series with me. I hope you were able to learn something and something you can take to your practice if you're already working with someone that is practicing ATRs, or if you're, interested in it, or if you're just someone that stopped by and you were just looking for some information. Hopefully you got some good information, basic information to take along with you as well. So, all right, I look forward to seeing you in the next training. Have a good day.